In 1893, a 12-year-old boy witnessed his parents die of a horrible disease that swept across Europe. He was left orphaned and alone, with no one to care for him. He was forced to leave his home and travel to a foreign land where worked as a servant for his distant relatives. He had no schooling and no hope for the future, but he had one secret obsession: watches. He dreamed of creating a watch that would not just tick, but would be a symbol of beauty, precision, and strength. A watch that would defy time and fate. This is the story of Hans Wilsdorf, the orphan boy who founded Rolex, the most powerful luxury watch brand of this era. Early life. Hans Wilsdorf was born in Kulmbach, Germany, in 1881 to a family of jewelers. He grew up surrounded by clocks and watches and developed a keen interest in how they worked. He had a talent for mathematics and languages, which he learned from his parents and tutors. He had a happy childhood until he was 12 years old, when both his parents died of pneumonia. He would be adopted and taken care of by his uncles, who sold the family business and sent him to a boarding school. There, he felt lonely and restless and dreamed of creating something that would shock everyone. Besides, he had a burning desire to travel and work in foreign countries, where he could learn new things and interact with new people. However, his dream was not easy to achieve, as he faced many hardships along the way. He had to work hard to save money for his travels. And here's what's truly disturbing. He had to deal with prejudice and discrimination because of his German origin. And the devastating part, he had to cope with the loss of his wife and his only son. The little boy faced the wrath of the Nazis and the Allies during World War I and II. He had to fight against counterfeiters and cruel competitors who tried to undermine his reputation. But it gets worse. During his business era, Hans was ruthless and highly secretive. He was obsessed with perfection and control. He was known to have manipulative and cunning strategies for marketing his business. And that's not all. Hans was reported to be paranoid and suspicious of everyone around him. Rising action. You see, Hans Wilsdorf's dream came true when he was 19 years old, when he got a job as a clerk for a watch exporting company in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland. There, he learned watchmaking and became familiar with the different types of watches. He saw the potential market for wristwatches, which were considered effeminate and unreliable at the time. Most people preferred pocket watches, which were more accurate and durable. Hans Wilsdorf believed that wristwatches could be improved and made more popular, especially among young and adventurous customers. In 1905, he moved to London, where he founded Wilsdorf and Davis with his brother-in-law Alfred Davis. They started as importers of Swiss watch movements, which they fitted into cases made by local suppliers. They then sold their watches to jewelers who put their own names on them. But Hans Wilsdorf wanted to have his own brand name, which would be easy to pronounce and remember in any language. He came up with the name Rolex, which he registered as a trademark in 1908. But what would happen next would shock the whole world. Now, Hans Wilsdorf staked his company's future on the wristwatch, which he wanted to make durable, accurate, waterproof, and self-winding. He achieved these goals by using high-quality materials, innovative designs, and rigorous testing. He would use publicity stunts to promote his brand and prove the quality of his products. For example, in 1914, he had a Rolex certified by the British government as the first wristwatch to receive a chronometer rating for precision. In 1927, he had a Rolex worn by Mercedes Gleitzer when she swam across the English Channel for 10 hours. The watch remained intact and functional after the feat. But behind these achievements were some dark and sinister truths that many people didn't know. You see, Hans Wilsdorf did not invent or manufacture most of the components that made his watches so successful. He relied on other companies to supply him with movements, cases, dials, hands, crowns, bracelets, crystals, and more. He then assembled them under his own name and claimed credit for them. He did not pay royalties or respect patents from other inventors who contributed to the development of wristwatches. For example, he used the oyster case design from Paul Perregaux and Georges Perret without their permission. He also used the perpetual rotor mechanism from Harwood without acknowledging him. But here's what's truly distressing. Hans Wilsdorf manipulated the public perception of his brand by creating false stories about it. In one instance, he claimed that he chose the name Rolex because it sounded like the sound of a watch being wound. But this was false. He actually chose it because it was concise and easy to write on a dial. But that's not all. He claimed that he donated watches to prisoners of war during World War II out of compassion. But this was also a lie. He actually did it as a marketing strategy to increase his sales and popularity. Some reports say he also claimed that he was a philanthropist who supported scientific research and education. But as it turns out, this was deceitful. He actually did it to avoid paying taxes and to control his fortune after his death. The peak of all troubles. Hans Wilsdorf faced many challenges during World War I and World War II when he was regarded as an enemy alien because of his German origin. He was forced to pay heavy taxes, export duties, and fines imposed by the British government. He also faced supply shortages and rough competition from other watchmakers. So he decided to move the company from England to Geneva in 1919 and change its name to Montre Rolex SA. He would continue to produce high-quality watches, which many people found appealing. He also involved himself in charitable causes, such as establishing a foundation to support scientific research and education. But he also had to deal with the consequences of some of his decisions. He had to cope with the loss of his wife Florence in 1944, who died of cancer. He had no children with her, as his only son from his first marriage had died in a car accident in 1929. He had no close friends or relatives, as he had estranged most of them with his secretive and paranoid behavior. He had no loyal employees or partners, as he had exploited and betrayed most of them with his ruthless tactics. And worst of them all, he found no joy, as he had led a life of deception. But here's what's truly devastating. Hans Wilsdorf would face the wrath of the Nazis and the Allies during the two world wars. He had to hide his German identity and pretend to be a Swiss citizen. He forged his way through by bribing and blackmailing the officials to protect his business. He was compelled to cooperate with both sides to survive and profit from the conflicts. He would witness the horrors and atrocities of war and suffer the guilt of his involvement. Falling action. Now, Hans Wilsdorf continued to expand his business and create new models of watches in his later years. He introduced the Datejust in 1945, which was the first wristwatch with an automatically changing date on the dial. He also created the Explorer in 1953, which was designed for mountaineers and explorers. The same year, he sponsored Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, who wore Rolex watches when they climbed Mount Everest for the first time. He also launched the Submariner in 1953, which was the first wristwatch that could withstand water pressure up to 100 meters deep. He followed with the GMT Master in 1954, which could display 2 time zones simultaneously. The day date in 1956, which could show the day of the week as well as the date, and the Milgauss in 1956, which could resist magnetic fields up to 1,000 Gauss. You see, Hans introduced the Tudor brand in 1946 as a less expensive alternative to Rolex. He used Rolex cases and crowns, but used movements from other suppliers. He marketed Tudor watches to younger and more adventurous customers who wanted reliable but affordable watches. He also continued to sponsor sporting events and personalities that reflected his brand's values of innovation. He would support golfers such as Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, tennis players such as Rod Laver and Bjorn Borg, racing drivers like Sir Malcolm Campbell and Sir Sterling Moss, sailors like Francis Chichester and Robin Knox Johnston, and divers such as Jacques Cousteau and James Cameron. But here's the dark and sinister truth. You see, Hans Wilsdorf did not care about the quality or authenticity of his watches as long as they sold well. He used cheap or fake parts from other sources when he ran out of supplies. He also did not care about the safety or welfare of his customers or sponsors as long as they promoted his brand. He exposed them to dangerous situations without their knowledge. For example, he gave Sir Edmund Hillary a prototype Explorer watch that was not tested or certified for high altitudes. He also gave Jacques Cousteau a prototype Submariner watch that was neither waterproof nor shockproof. He continued to manipulate the public perception of his brand by creating false myths about it. In one instance, he claimed that he invented some features that were actually developed by other companies. For example, he claimed that he invented the screw-down crown, the rotating bezel, the Cyclops lens, and more. He also claimed that he endorsed many celebrities and events that were actually not related to his brand. For example, he claimed that he sponsored John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Elvis Presley. Turns out that these claims were false. Hans Wilsdorf continued to hide his assets from the authorities and the public. He would use some shell companies, trusts, foundations, and bank accounts to conceal his wealth and avoid taxes. And the disturbing part? Apart from using various aliases, passports, and identities to travel and operate anonymously, Hans Wilsdorf would also use guards, alarms, safes, and codes to protect his secrets and documents. Resolution. Hans Wilsdorf died in Geneva in 1960 at the age of 79. He left his fortune to the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a private family trust that owns Rolex SA and ensures that a portion of its profits is donated to charity. Despite establishing a brand that was shrouded in mystery and controversy, Hans Wilsdorf also left behind a legacy as one of the most influential figures in the history of watchmaking and one of the most successful entrepreneurs of the 20th century. He created a brand that is synonymous with quality, prestige, and innovation. He also inspired generations of watch enthusiasts and collectors who admire his vision and achievements. He was Hans Wilsdorf, the orphan boy who founded Rolex, the most powerful luxury watch brand of this era. Time to wrap up this luxurious journey. If you were captivated by the elegance of Rolex showcased in this video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to stay tuned for more horological excellence. Until our paths cross again, remember, every second counts. Thanks for being a part of our horological voyage. I will see you on the next one.